GTR bonnet's the same as the non-GTR variants. They just don't have that front lip.
Let me take you to school. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, they don't have that. That they just don't. They're the front end is shaped a little bit differently. They might be a different material. Like I think the GTR one might be like a little lighter or something. I don't know, but yeah, I agree with what you're saying. Like they're not that rare, which is why I don't understand why they're fetching like 50, 60 grand now.
Right.
Like it's just the idea of you weren't able to have one and now you can have one, and that's why they're so expensive. Like other than that, there's nothing. I'm not gonna say there's nothing special about the GTR because obviously there's something special about the GTR specifically. But the R32 in general isn't like it shouldn't be considered like a unicorn car because they're just not.
No, they're not. And I don't even think that to today's standards they're all that special, you know? I think at the time they were like incredible, you know, almost quote unquote budget, like fast cars that were built purposely. And I just don't think that that's the case anymore. Like I think compared to a new car, they're relatively comparable for half the cost. You know what I mean? Like you could have a 350 or a 370Z. You could have an FRS. Like you could have stuff that's more reliable, isn't going to break on you, is relatively easy to get power out of. And so it's like, why we're paying $40,000 or $50,000 for this car that has bubbles in the dashboard. I mean, I know we've talked about this in previous episodes, but I think his video kind of proves that, and you've already said it before, is you pay a lot of money for a car that's just not been maintained and that you're gonna have issues with.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's why I have a different perspective on it is because I didn't pay $40,000-$50,000 for my car,
right.
And maybe that's why I have maybe a more reasonable, more measured perspective. You know, like for him, I understand why you'd be pissed if you paid $50,000 for it. I paid $15,000 for my car, so
Right.
it's like a completely different animal.
I
Like
remember when you bought yours, and
yeah,
I still thought, because you bought yours for 15, my friend Willis bought a Mark IV Turbo Supra for 18, and that was with the R154.
mm-hmm.
Um, and I just remember, you know, guys would buy these chasers for like 12, 10 to 12-ish. And I remember being like, God, that's way too much money for those. And then now look at the values, you know? So it's like, I was just talking to Jess about this. Like everything is relative, you know? Because I remember
Mm-hmm.
when like you and I went to Japan, I mean, you were already there. So you heard stories of these guys buying GTRs for like 5 or 6 grand, you know, or like
Yeah.
Sylvia's for 3. And so when we went there, we would see these values and be like, holy shit, this is way too much money. And then they just kept going up and up and up. And so now it's like you and I look back and we're like, man, everything was so cheap back then, but it didn't feel cheap.
Yeah, it didn't. I mean, like my first R32 I had, I paid $3,500 for that.
Right.
Like
The purple one.
that,
Right?
yeah, that's freaking crazy. And like, in GTRs weren't that much more expensive when I was looking before I got there. I just decided on the R32 because I wanted to drift, or the GTST that I had. But yeah, I mean, and that kind of leads us into the listener topic we had, like why are 90s Japanese cars double, triple what the MSRP was. It's all about supply and demand. We've talked about it before.
Yeah. It's inflation.
Yeah. I mean, it's
there's a lot of things.
inflation mixed with supply and demand. They're still not super easy to get in the States. I guess you have to go through the whole rigmarole of getting it there.
Right.
So,
Well, not only that, too, we've been waiting for like decades for these things, you know? And
yeah.
so like now is when they're finally getting legal. And so that's definitely, it's all hype too, you know? I think it's one of those things where it's like everybody that wanted one and never saw one before buys one. And then if you notice, a lot of people sell their right-hand drives. Like there's not many that'll hold on to them and build them. It seems like I see a lot of them for sale all the time.
Well, a lot of people don't fall in love with these cars. Like I have a friend that has he has a right-hand drive Supra. It's a twin turbo, but it's an automatic. But I talked to him about it. I was like, what are you going to do with it? Are you going to keep it? You're going to do it? He's like, I'm just not like, he's very open with it's just an investment. Like he's going to bring it back to the States. And, a lot of people, they fetishize over these cars. And then when you finally get it, you're like, It's not all that.
Right.
I mean, it would have
Well,
been in the
especially when you
90s. Yeah.
pay. Yeah, I think a big part of that's the price tag too. It's like
Yeah.
what you pay versus what you get. It's like you could get a way nicer car now.
Yeah.
Um, no, dude. So I think it's just kind of everybody kind of buys it, and then they're like, "Oh shit, this isn't as good as I thought it was going to be 20 years ago." You know.
Hmm. Yeah.
But yeah, we're throwing in viewer topics. If you go to our Instagram, there's a highlight on our page, and you can write into us, and you can say, "Hey, I want you guys to talk about this." So that's the first listener topic we have is like, what's the '90s Japanese car market like? Why is it the way that it is? Um, and of course we're going to answer with our opinions on these things. So I mean, really, I think it just comes down to, like you said, people kind of fetishizing these cars, and then they're just not living up to the hype, or they're having a bunch of issues, or you've got to put
Yeah.
a bunch of money into them to get them decent again.
Yeah. And that's the thing. Then that's where I was going with the Whistling Diesel thing. Like, I don't. I again, I haven't like fully sat down and watched the video. I don't know what his rationale was behind buying two. Maybe he's like, well, instead of paying the cost to rebuild this, I'll just buy another. I don't know. Maybe he was just doing it just for the clout. I don't know. And I guess I would if I watched the video. But unlike you, like you said, you don't mind his channel and like his content. I don't know. I always roll my eyes when I watch stuff like that, just because. And even like his other videos. I mean, it seems like they're having fun, just like doing stupid shit with cars. And I'm not
Right.
gonna be sitting here like, don't do that, blah blah blah. It's just not for me.
Right.
But if you know anything about old Japanese cars, you know when you buy one, it's not just a matter of, it's not like a new car. You're not driving it off the lot and going and ripping it around town. You buy it, you bring it back, you inspect it, which you should have had it inspected beforehand. You need to know the condition of the engine, how many miles, chassis, blah, blah, all that shit. And then if you don't do that, don't be surprised if it doesn't make it 100 miles down the road, like,
Right.
or even 1,000 miles or whatever. Just don't be surprised.
I mean, we talked
Especially
about it. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, especially if you're buying a motor that was built by somebody and wasn't tested. Like, building
Right.
a motor and engine is one thing, but it needs to be like tested and driven and broken in and proven, because, it's going to have issues. It's going to be like a teething period where you got to get the little niggles and stuff. And if you don't do that, you're going to have issues that present way worse down the line.
Yeah.
Like, I speak from experience. I had a freshly built engine, and there was nothing wrong with the engine being built. But instead of developing the motor properly, especially for what I was trying to do, I was just like, this bitch runs and drives. Let me drive the shit out of it. And of course, it blew up.
Yeah.
And so that's where I stand on that.
Right. No, I mean, that makes total sense. And yeah, I don't think we're gonna beat a dead horse about it. But thank you, Dylan, for chiming in about the '90s Japanese car market. And then the other question we got is from Jonah about, um, if you should or shouldn't buy a project car. He bought a IS 300 Sport Cross, which is the wagon.
Mm-hmm.
And he was basically saying, it's been nothing but problems, and like the previous owners did a bunch of shit that they shouldn't have on it. And so his opinion was like, you just shouldn't buy a project car because you're always going to have issues. But I did want to expand on that, because I think that that's only half true. I think when you buy a project car, it can be good and bad. And I think it depends on what your intent is. I probably wouldn't buy a project car if it was going to be a daily driver.
Yeah.
If I needed to rely on it, and I'm buying this car not knowing the work that's been put in or what's been messed with, I wouldn't even touch it. But if I was buying it to build it or have it be a long-term project or a drift car or whatever, I would absolutely buy a project car, because of what's been most of the time when you buy a project, it already has parts on it, right? You're buying a project with coilovers, with a boost controller, maybe an upgraded turbo setup, whatever it might be, arms, wheels, brakes. And you never get your equity out of that car. So when the seller, they may have put 15 grand into it, but they're going to sell the car for 8 to 10, right? And so it's like
Mm-hmm.
you're getting 5 to 7,000 of just equity from parts. And so that's why it's like, if you've got time to investigate and go back and look at, and possibly fix things that weren't done right, that's going to be the better bang for your buck, and you'll be able to buy that already kind of set up with how you would like it.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't have to worry about it being super reliable. So that's kind of where I stand on that one. Did you have anything to add?
Well, okay. Step one. If you're buying a project car with the intent as having it as a daily, you've already fucked yourself. congratulations, you played yourself. Because there's no reality in which that's going to work out for you. I mean, even if you
It
buy
depends on
like
how
what you,
it depends on how fucked with it is, though, too.
well, that's what I'm saying. If it's been fucked up with by someone previously, or even if you think it's immaculate, if it's got X amount of miles on it, let's say 90,000 or above or whatever, which most old Japanese cars have now,
That's low.
you're
Dude.
fucked.
What? Fuck out of here. What?
Dude, my fucking Stagia has, I think it's like 90,000 on it, which
Yeah, but that's different.
when
though. That's Japanese.
either way, okay, I take back that number. Let's not put a number on it. If you buy an old Japanese car, you're fucked. And ask me how I know. Ask any old, especially if you're trying to use it as a daily.
Yeah, but you've also had a terrible experience.
Yeah, but I mean, even with the Stagia, like the Stagia is super clean, but it has little issues here and there. And I bought it with the intent of using it as a daily, and I've already had to get a ride to work like once or twice because the fucking thing wasn't running right. So that's the only, I don't say that to say don't do it. I'm just saying if you do that, if you buy a project car and you're planning on using it as a daily, you should have a backup plan.
Do you think
get a moped or something?
Do you think that's attributed to buying a project car though, or do you think that's more because you bought it sight unseen?
I mean, sight unseen, yes, but even if I had bought it sight seen, I don't know what's the opposite of sight unseen, but
sight seen.
If you plan on modifying it at all, even if it's like perfectly stock, or if like you said, if I had inspected it and sat down and looked at it, if you plan on modifying it, you're going to run into that type of stuff where you go to put on the new mod and you snap a screw, or you freaking fuck something up, or this doesn't fit, or it's not perfect, and now you're assed out trying to get to work on Monday,
right?
Because your car's sitting in the driveway. So my main caveat with should you buy a project car is you need to ask yourself, do you have an actual daily driver? Do you have enough money to spend? Is it just going to become a paperweight in your driveway? And do you have space for it? Like those three things are kind of like the main like things. If you have space for it where it's not going to be an inconvenience, then shoot. If you have the money to put into it, then shoot. And if you have another way to get to A and B, then go ahead, go for it.
Yeah, that's a good call. I mean, that was the biggest difference I think with my 240 was when it was a daily, I had to fix it like that night with methods that maybe weren't the best, but they worked. You know what I mean? And so I've talked about this on the podcast already, but that was my intent whenever I was fixing it. Now that I don't have it as a daily, is like now I have the time to wait for parts to come in and to do things properly and spend a couple days, doing wiring or on an install or whatever. I don't need to like stay up till 2 a.m. And so there is a different intent there. And I feel like my attention to detail on the car now is way higher than it was, which is probably just because I'm a little bit older too. And I care more now about preservation than I did before. But yeah, there's a big difference. And I think just the actually sitting there and being like, oh shit, I need to get this done right now. Like that kind of attitude when you're fixing something is a little bit more destructive. And it's definitely like just putting a Band-Aid on it most times. So yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah. I was just thinking of like, so one time, the clutch did something. I forgot what I was doing on the GTR, and the clutch was like super spongy. So I was like, okay, let me bleed this bitch. So I used to work mid shift. So I would go into work. No, I think this is when I was working swings, whatever it was. I would go into work at like 6 or 7 p.m. whatever the fuck. So I wake up, get my uniform on. I was like, this will be a quick fix. I start trying to bleed the clutch. It doesn't go. It's still not driving properly. I was like, maybe I need to adjust the throw length of the clutch. I start like cranking on that. And then, long story short, I ended up like completely fucking the fucking slave cylinder up. Not the slave cylinder, the master cylinder up. Like to the point where it wouldn't work at all. And I'm like sitting there in my uniform ready to go to work. And I was like, oh, fuck. So now I have to like call my fucking supervisor and be like, yeah, I can't. I'm not going to be there on time. And I had to get someone to come pick me up. That's like the kind of stuff you end up with when you have a project car as your daily.
Yeah,
so
for real. Jeez. Yeah, I don't miss that at all. Being able to have a nice daily is always a bonus.
Yeah.
But I mean, even really, if that means like driving boring shit, you know what I mean? I used to kind of pride myself too on dailying a 240. I think a lot of people pride themselves on dailying like a cool car. Which is nice if you have several cars too daily. But then if it's like you just have one, I don't know. I mean, to each
Yeah.
their own, I guess is what I'm getting at. If you want to
Well,
do that, dude, like go for it. I'm not trying to say don't do it, but it's